Welcome to the Human Design Profiles, an entrepreneurship podcast. I'm your host, Chantel. I'm a 1-3 manifesting generator, small business strategist, and the author of the Aligned Action series of books for solo entrepreneurs. Thanks for joining us today. This show is an active learning experiment. It's all about how we experience entrepreneurship as individuals through our human design. Each episode profiles a human design enthusiast / business owner who's here to share about how their personal profile lines have influenced them on their business journey and how this changes the decisions that they make on a daily basis as business owners. Today, I'm connecting with Kaitlyn, a business and energetics coach dedicated to helping high-achieving business owners simplify their companies so they can work less, feel more spacious, fall back in love with their lives and businesses, and not sacrifice impact or income. Have a listen while today's guest, Kaitlyn, a 6'2", shares her story while you read between the lines. Kaitlyn, something you talk a lot about in your content is a horizontal reset. And I have to ask, is this a 2-line thing or a projector thing or both?
That's actually a good question. I relate it to being non-sacral. You know, it might be in the actual transmission from Ra, but I'm not sure where. It's just something I've picked up from over the years that non-sacrals, projectors really need time to kind of empty out and clear some conditioning and do that well when we're horizontal. So I just use that as a reason to lay on my couch throughout the day and kind of reset. And it's, supposed to be a time of relaxing and not just, scrolling on my phone or whatever, like just fully being in the horizontal reset. And it works. I mean, I think it works for all types, not just non-sacrals, but it's really helpful for me. I've never thought about if it's also a second line thing. I could see it being a second line thing as well.
Yeah, for sure. I'm so curious about how you've integrated it into your personal brand. It's a thing that you talk about. It's something that you're modeling. And it feels like a little bit of like that 6-line role model.
Yeah. I think about my 6th line so much, like in that regard. My clients will hear me say this kind of stuff, even if they're not a 6th line, but I think about what I want to help people with, what I want to help them achieve, what I want to help them step into. And I have this little kind of tick in the back of my brain of like, I've got to show up for that. I've got to go first. I've got to lead the way. I'm also an Aries rising, so maybe there's some of that in there, but like I've got to walk the talk, which is I think a really 6th-line drive. We have to, integrity being such a huge thing for us. And so the stories that I will tell clients is like, I really believe in that embodiment, in that walking the talk. And if we're saying, do this or think about this or approach your business this way or whatever, like it's our responsibility to do that first, to lead that way. And so taking a horizontal reset, sometimes my brain is like, we don't have time for this or whatever, firing off like it does. And I'm like, wait, this is what I want people to feel like they can have in their business. This is what I want to help people achieve in their business. I have to go do it to be in integrity, which I just feel like is like a very 6th-line thought process.
Totally. Alongside that, what are some of your other favorite ways to embody that role model energy for the 6th-line?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to knowing my core values, knowing what I stand for. I don't have a program on like horizontal reset, right? But like knowing the maybe I should, but knowing the things that I want people to learn from being in my world or experience from being in my world, those all relate to values that I hold. And so I think it's like, how can I show that? Because, I am a business owner. I am predominantly on Instagram. It's a showing kind of platform. So it's like, where do these things show up in my day to day, which is very hard for my 2nd-line because I'm just doing it. Right. So where am I doing this in my day to day? And how can I bring that into the conversation? And it often takes, like, for example, the horizontal reset thing. That was because someone reflected back to me, oh, I associate this with you. And I was like, oh, I should really lean into that, huh? Which is the 2nd-line, just being like, whatever, I'm just doing it, not even thinking about it. As a 2nd-line, as a projector, I need people to reflect those things back to me. And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to turn up the volume on that and really make that part of the brand.
The 2nd-line being the natural. Are there other skills and talents that you've discovered throughout this way?
I would say almost all of them. Yeah, I talk a lot. My longtime coach is a human design trainer, teacher. And I remember us talking a long, long time ago about the 6th-line. And I was telling her in an offhanded way. I don't even remember the context now, but I was like, as a kid, I was so weird. I remember distinctly demanding to get to school early in 5th grade, like to be dropped off in the carpool early because I wanted to have enough time to sit and chat with the teacher who managed the carpool and just catch up with her and be there for her as like a 10-year-old. And then in retrospect, I get older. I'm like, oh, that's literally what people pay me to do, is to sit with them and to be with them and to listen to them
Yeah.
and to reflect. And I was like, I was doing that then. And so I feel like most of the things that I now do intentionally and for my business and for my life and for my well-being are things that I have always been doing. I just needed someone to be like, oh, that makes sense. That's a thing. Not just
Yeah.
everyone doesn't do that kind of vibe.
And human design itself is a really great tool for that too, because I find if I have this personality point that I'm kind of mulling over,
Mhm.
I can often find a clue to it or a hint to it in human design. It does help to reflect
Yeah.
back onto us some aspects of ourselves.
I totally agree with that. I think it's interesting how many people, I mean, I guess you've spoken to lots of people about human
Mhm.
design. In my experience, it's almost like permission giving of like, hey, well, this thing says that makes sense. I must make sense when you've been
Right.
thinking through something or struggling with some aspect or whatever. It's like, wait, it's right here. This is
Yeah,
normal. Yeah.
totally. So, as a 6-2, you go through different phases. Tell me about the first phase of your life as a 6-2 and what was it like moving on to the roof?
Yeah. I feel like I've lived 100 lives within the first 30 years of my life. Not
Uh-huh.
that I had any really like dramatic or intense or very interesting things, even, but just so many phases. I can remember even middle school, I really wanted to be a mall goth. I really wanted to go to Hot Topic. And my mom was like, absolutely not. And then I remember the next week, I was like, oh, now I'm like a ballerina. That's all I'm wearing. And it's pink and it's tutus and it's so girly and so hyper feminine. And I just like would drastically change how I presented myself, how I saw myself. And even now on the roof, like I think the realization is that all of those are a part of me and not these segmented pieces that it felt like at the time. But yeah, there's just been all these little things. And I think your 20s can be challenging as a sixth line because a lot of people are figuring out a lot of things about themselves, finding their career paths, finding people they want to spend their lives with and things like that. And I feel like my experience was like still pretty messy up until right about like 27, 28, when I was like, okay, like things are starting to kind of make sense. And then turning
Right.
30, it's like, I feel like I kind of got a grasp on like who I am now. But I often felt, I'm from the South. And so everyone's married very young and all that stuff is the norm. And I always felt like behind. And now I'm just really grateful for the timing of everything.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
As a 3-line who gets to live in that forever, I'm like, how nice for you that you get to go on the roof.
I kind of didn't put that together.
It's okay, fine. But no, obviously kidding. I do totally relate to that rapid identity shift back and forth is something that's super familiar to me as well. So as you're saying that, I'm like, yep,
Yeah. And I
totally
think
get
it's
it.
so wild. I remember saying to a different mentor at one point, like, I struggle with how to show up online because there's this part of me that is, I have a darker sense of humor, a little bit antagonistic, a little bit can be a little nihilistic sometimes, which I think is like kind of the sixth line being jaded from their third line experiences. But I also have this part of me that's like, everything is magical and everything is wonderful. And have you looked outside and seen the birds? Like, how incredible. And I'm like, that's intense. That's an intense spectrum. And she was like, everyone has those kind of spectrums. That's
Right.
the magic. And I was like, oh, okay. Like it makes sense that I have such a breadth of life experiences that all
Mhm.
accumulate into something unique.
100%. That's actually a really great definition of what it's like to be a 6-line and a 3-line, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A spectrum.
What are some other aspects of your chart that you love?
Hmm. I love my undefined ajna so much.
Okay.
I love my 1020.
Hmm.
That connects my throat and G center a lot. And I love my defined heart, my defined ego a lot. Those are probably like my favorite aspects. And then in a weird way, I did not love this about my chart for a very long time, but I'm coming to terms with it. I'm coming to understand it. But there is a lot of things in my chart that point to learning patience and
Hmm.
slowing down and being in the moment. And I don't consider myself a naturally patient person, but seeing that in my chart and seeing that reflected, it's been a really big teacher of like, we can slow down, we can be here, we can appreciate the moment, which trickles into things that I support other people with now. So it's a really cool kind of journey.
Yeah, I think I actually just saw on your stories today or yesterday. Were you reading Gene Keys about
Yeah.
patience? Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever I feel like I'm kind of in a rut mindset wise, I just go back to reading the Gene Keys because you always find something new every time you read it.
Yeah, I mean, it is a huge book, so there's lots to dive into.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do not have an undefined ajna. Mine's defined, but I do have the 1020 and I also have the defined heart. So I'm curious about what I don't have. Tell me
Yeah.
what the undefined ajna feels like for you and why that's a piece that you love.
Yeah. At first, I didn't for some reason. I don't know if this is other people's experience with human design, but I remember the first time I looked at my chart, I just did not care about the head and the ajna for some reason. I was like, those are the least interesting ones to me. I like immediately was like, tell me about this heart, tell me about this 3740. I just like went right into those. And so it took me a while to come around to even looking at the ajna, even caring to learn more about it or explore it. And what I really liked about it was or what I continue to really like about it is like the curiosity that it brings and
Hmm.
the nuance that it opens me up to and the ability to share that with other people and be like, but what about these other perspectives? What about these other angles? What about all of the ways that this could look instead? I really enjoy that. I really enjoy confidently and powerfully saying, I don't know when I don't know,
Yeah.
and not feeling this need to put on airs or try to keep up. I have really
Mhm.
found so much comfort and just being like, oh, I don't know. Can you tell me more? Versus I think growing up, wanting to be like, I'm smart. I know everything. Let me just bullshit my, oh, sorry. Let me just make my way through this and, try to context clue something together versus now just really confidently and comfortably being like, I don't know that. And that just feels like a flex to me.
hmm It actually feels a little bit like sixth line wisdom too. I
Yeah.
bet you had a lot of experiences pre on the roof where you experienced that uncertainty and that feeling of being in between and kind of put on the spot that way. And
Mhm.
then through those experiences, you found the wisdom of like, no, we're okay with that.
I hadn't thought about it like that, but that would totally make sense because I
Yeah.
don't think that I had that confidence. That I grew into that confidence. I was definitely
hmm
someone who felt like, I don't know the answer, just like immediate cold sweat,
hmm
panic. Like, and now I'm just like, I don't know the answer. Tell me.
There's something about being a mentor in business as well that I think brings that because you've been asked so many questions by this point, and there's situations where that comes up in client calls where someone brings something that comes out of left field, right? And you have
Yeah.
to be open to that in on a kind of a different level and curious.
Yeah. I have some clients who are coaches, and I have some clients who their background is more in like how my background is more in trade, like a designer, a copywriter, and they're starting to shift into something where they're more in the brand strategist role or something where there is a level of coaching or mentoring or having those sorts of conversations with people. And we talk a lot
Mhm.
about the nerves that they can feel going into
Right.
those like what are they could ask anything.
Yeah.
They could ask anything and like that's
Yeah.
okay. Like you don't have to have an answer in, half a second that is the right answer and the perfect answer. That's not actually helpful to anyone probably, unless you were
Yeah.
like, oh, what's, the best coffee and you want to be like, oh, it's a macadamia nut milk latte. But like in business, like it's not really about just like it's this because that's not true.
Last night I dreamt about human design
Oh, cool.
and I dreamt that I was being coached by an old coach that I had.
Mhm.
And I actually kind of woke up thinking about how my three line loves being put on the spot.
Mhm.
I didn't know that about myself consciously, but like crystallized for me in the last 24 hours, I guess.
Yeah.
Actually, later today, I have a free monthly community call that I do. And I put the link pretty much everywhere. So, like, anyone could show up and anyone could join that room and ask me anything. And I actually really love getting to flip back and forth between topics and having to do that rapid pivot. That's exciting for me
Mm.
and
Yeah.
satisfying as an MG. But it's not something that I had previously like put my finger on. Obviously, I love to respond. That's my strategy. So I love being asked questions and responding to questions. But I do enjoy that feeling. I invite that feeling of like, do I know the answer to this? Do I not know the answer to this? There's something really satisfying about it to me.
It makes me think of also now that I know that we share a 1020, like that does also feel very that energy of like truth in the now, trusting the wisdom that comes
Yes.
out. That was something that for when I was learning about the 1020, I was always fascinated by it. but it almost felt like a dream where like you wake up and you kind of remember it and then like it drifts like really fast. That's how understanding the 1020 felt for me. I'd be like, oh yeah, that totally, wait, what? Like I would get it for a second and then it would just like disappear. And a couple of years ago, I actually went on Mariah and Shay's podcast. And during that time, I was deep in the exploration of the 1020. And I got off that podcast and I was like, that felt incredible. I didn't know what we were going to talk about going into it. I was so lit up and I just felt amazing. I remember talking to my coach and she was like, sounds like your 1020 was like crushing it. And I was like, yeah, I love this. So it kind of feels like the same vibe.
My one line is now like, ooh, deep exploration into the 1020, must find out more. Did you find anything about how to invite that to come forward? Because for me, I'm still in the phase of trying to catch it after it happens. I do that mostly by having my auto transcription on all the time. Even if I notice myself in real life talking to someone, I'll turn that on if I feel like I might happen to say something insightful,
Yeah.
so that I can catch it later. But how do you do it?
So my coach and I, we actually went deep into this because that was literally my question. I was like, how do I get more of that? I want that feeling. Right. How do I have more of that? Yeah. So we analyzed that situation. And she was like, it was someone that you felt really recognized by. And then the conversation that we actually had, like they understood me. Mariah and I had a relationship, like a friendship before that. I felt recognized. I felt invited. It was like, I guess I don't know if I waited on my emotional wave to say yes or no, but regardless, it was the right decision to go on it. But it was just like one of those things where they saw me as someone who could add value, who had something good to share, asked me poignant questions about things I wanted to talk about. And so, of course, that's how the energy worked, was sort of our thoughts. So I guess that's kind of projector specific, but maybe we could take that same logic and apply it to you. Like when those moments happen, is it when you're like deep in like a sacral response and it's like a full yes, and that's when that magic can come in?
It's interesting, especially with having all of these different recordings with guests. It does give me the opportunity to analyze that, because sometimes in an interview I feel really on, and then other times I just feel like shut off from that part of me, right? And so it would be interesting to go back and look over the ones where I felt more of that. Sometimes I wonder too if it's like, obviously we're forming a connection chart in the moment, right? And so there's possibly elements that we have that are feeding each other's gates, which obviously not all charts are compatible in the same ways. So it's possible that that's part of it too. I've often wondered about that. And maybe it's just like we both have the 1020, right? And so in the moment talking about it, the 1020 is charged.
It's like extremely
Yeah. Okay. So we have different types. You are an emo projector. How does being an emo projector and a 6-2 impact how you do business?
Yeah. Well, so kind of like I was hinting at before, the emotional authority was one that was a little hard for me to grasp, because I was just like, no, I want to be splenic. I want to just know in the moment. And I was like a little bratty about it for a while.
Honestly, I have an undefined emotional center, and like all experiences are good and all experiences are valid, but I would dread that being in my chart. I think I would have such a hard time being the opposite. So I can totally see how that would take a little bit of time to come to terms with. That emotional wave feels like a challenging thing to just live with practically in the world.
Yeah. And a world that isn't really designed for it, in a world that is, at least in the culture that I'm exposed to, being in the United States, it is very like go, 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 hustle, 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 move fast, move quick. And the emotional authority is like, hold on. I need a minute. Right. Which is a little uncommon. So yeah, I think a lot of people probably struggle with it when they first get it, because it's just not the glamorous one. But I've come to see the beauty of it, because the life I want to live is slow and intentional and thoughtful. And so it, in a way, kind of forces me into that. I can appreciate it now, but it took a while. Like, I'll be fully transparent. It took a while. And there's still moments that it's hard. There's moments where I'm like a full, like, yes, I want this. And I'm like, can I just have a minute? And most of the time people are, at least in the business context, at least somewhat familiar with human design. And so when I say, I need to just take this through my authority before I do anything, they're like, okay. And
Right.
I've yet to be hit with someone being like, no, now. But there's also this like little sassy part of me that would love to be like, all right, well, then it's a no.
For sure. That would be like the best way to know, right?
Yeah.
If you got that
Yeah.
response, yeah, that'd be an instant no.
Yeah.
Like emotional wave conquered.
But to answer your question, the work that I do with clients is very much like projector vibes. I love intimate containers. I love one-on-one containers. I love small groups. Like I love being with a person and going really deep. And I just feel like that's very like projector and also kind of six line. I picture six line just being like, let's go in this corner and talk at like the party.
Yeah.
But that's very much like me. And I think the sixth line and the second line both show up a lot in how I market. I very much lean into, like we were talking about before, the role model energy, being open to and having a lot of support built in to reflect things back to me of this is something you're good at, or this is something we see for you. And then taking that and leaning into it with my marketing and how I create. I'm not an expert on this at all, but I know in like the BG5 system that I serve second lines really well. So I speak a lot to my second line experience to call in more of those people in my fractal or whatever.
Mhm.
And yeah, I would say that's how, like, basically in everything I do, in how I make offers, how I serve people, and how I market and sell, it's threaded throughout.
Are there any ways that you found personally to be able to see and nurture that quality in yourself, or what would you recommend to other two lines?
Yes. I I'm not the kind of person that's like, oh, everyone needs a coach or everyone needs a mentor or anything like that. I think different seasons call for different things. But I have found what has helped me the most is having someone in my life that gets it. So whether it be me explicitly saying to my partner, I'm struggling right now to understand myself. How do you see me? How are you understanding me? My longtime coach that I mentioned before, she's very gifted at providing and knows that I need that. So she's very much saying, I see this in you. I see how you're approaching this. I see your perspective on here. Here's what your perspective looks like from my angle, and letting me sort of like witness her witnessing me, I guess.
Yeah.
And I explicitly ask people, clients that I work with, et cetera, I'm like, what's landing for you? What are your takeaways? I'm constantly asking for that feedback.
Mhm.
I'm just looking for those threads
Sure.
to pop up where people will say, oh, I really like how you talk about this, or I really like how you showed up like this. And I'm just accumulating that information and filtering it through. Does that feel like something I want to lean into more and showcase more?
Right. That
Yeah.
process makes a lot of sense. Getting that reflection back, filtering it through your authority, and then using it to impact future decisions.
Yeah. And I think like there's maybe a little bit of awkwardness if you've not asked people for that before. But at this point, I've curated some people around me that I really value their opinions. I really trust their opinions.
Right.
And so it feels easier to have that vulnerable moment of like, could you tell me what you see in me for a second? Because I'm not really seeing much. And then they will offer
Hmm.
that to me, you know?
I actually do see the two line as having an element of vulnerability to it. I think
Yeah.
that's a little bit inherent in that. Would you
Yeah.
agree?
Yeah. So I think about the second line being in their living room with the windows open, people can see them. Like it's incredibly vulnerable,
Yeah.
but it's almost like you don't know that you're being watched until you get those reflections from people. And so I guess my way of just saying, like, could you just give them to me versus like being blindsided by it feels a little bit better.
Absolutely. I love
Yeah.
that. And it makes sense from a projector standpoint as well with being
Yeah.
supportive.
The language around projectors is often to like be the lighthouse, to start the conversations that you want to be having, not like in a manifestor way, but more like I really enjoy talking about ease, or I really enjoy talking about spaciousness, or whatever. This is something I'm good at. Here's what I'm thinking about, da, 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 so that people can say, oh, you're really good at this. Help me with this.
Right. So, how does waiting for the invitation look like in your business? You've said that when you're marketing, you're obviously putting yourself out into the world. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. I think balancing that can be kind of confusing. I know for a lot of projectors, myself included, when we first like get that little takeaway, oh, wait for the invitation. It's like, okay, so just do nothing and people with credit cards will come running. And while that would be cool, I guess, it's not really how it works. And so the things that I have been told that have helped, whether or not they're based in the human design actual text or not, was thinking about it as like, if someone chooses to follow me, or someone chooses to listen to my podcast, or someone chooses to come onto my email newsletter, that is an invitation. They're opening up that line. And I can trust that I'm allowed to speak about the things that I want to speak about, share the wisdom that I've accumulated, share the perspectives that I have in those spaces. The invitation is already there, and they can close the invitation, right? They can unsubscribe or they can unfollow, but I don't need there to be an invitation for me to share what I want to share for myself and for my business.
Right.
Um, that has the permission that I needed, because I definitely was like, well, what do I do then? Like when I
Yeah,
first
it's
heard that.
confusing.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is like, if someone could like go through my DMs, what they would see is, when people reach out with a question about this or clarification about that or whatever, I'm constantly being like, can I offer you some thoughts here? I'm constantly asking for that, because I've learned and been burned so many times of like just throwing out unsolicited advice. And then
Mhm.
people are like, don't listen or don't care or take it the wrong way or whatever. And then I feel bitter. And so I'm basically like always asking consent before I'm going deeper
Mhm.
with somebody, which is a great practice for a projector, probably a great practice for most people in general, but especially helpful for projectors to not feel bitter all the time.
That's fantastic advice and a great, easy way to feel successful in what you're doing, right? Feel that self theme instead.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well, this has been lovely. I'm so glad that we got to chat. I know you're excited about pulling an affirmation card specifically for your 6-2 self. So let's move on to that component of the show. If you're ready, you and I'll take a deep breath in together. I'll let that go. And the card that has come up for you today reads, I am on my own unique path to becoming deeply wise. Can I welcome in more compassion towards how I move through the world?
I love that. I think that feels so relatable to kind of the conversation around patience. That just feels very applicable to what I was posting yesterday about and thinking about. Even today, I was reading the Gene Key 35, because I have the 535, but I have the two in my unconscious sun and earth. A new thing that I had never realized about the 35th gate came through, talking about how it's not always this hunger for newness, but this hunger to dive deeper into what is,
Hmm.
and slow down and find, no day is exactly the same, no moment is exactly the same, the moon is never in the same spot, the stars are never like. And so realizing that there is so much newness in every moment, something about that feels like applicable to this, of just like, can I trust that I can move intentionally and I can move slowly and I can move with patience, and like things will still work. And of course they will. Hmm.
That's perfect. Oh, I'm so glad. Where can people get in touch with you if they want to share a moment?
Yeah, I'm an Instagram girly, so come hang out with me over there, Kaitlyn S. Kessler, and send me a DM. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Can you tell us about your podcast too?
Oh, yeah, I have a podcast myself. Thank you. That's called Spacious. And we have guests on. Sometimes it's just me chatting solo, but it's a short little podcast to help you find and create more spaciousness in your business.